Thank you all to the very first Bee Talks by the Milton Bee Club. Little round of applause for us. I'm not going to get emotional, but I need to thank, we're all here, like I told Bob and Becky earlier this morning, because of my wife Brigitte, who in 2016, in August, for her birthday, asked me like, I want a beehive. I'm like, beehive? Go online, buy the whole setup, then realize that nucleus, the beginning of a hive, is only available in March and April of the following year. As a consequence, we're back in the day renting a place, so we had Christmas decorated beehive in our living room. And then the journey started all the way up here in 2022 at this particular place at the ribbon cutting of the city of Milton opened this beautiful complex. We had our very first Milton Bee Club outing out here on the lawn, right, for Earth Day. And when I look in the room, I see some of our members who were bravely enough to join me and the others on this amazing journey. This is the very first Bee Talks, as we've coined it. Thank you again to Bob and Becky to graciously and kindly spend a Saturday with us here. To enlighten us a bit more on their specific subject chosen. Becky Griffin will kick it off, and then Bob will follow shortly. Bob is like the Rolling Stones jacker. Can we get a photo of that, please? We got me Jagger in the house, ladies and gentlemen. Anyway, but Bob is a gentleman I got introduced to through a fellow beekeeper here. He's like, Bob Biddy, YouTube videos. Remember, Rajiv, on that night I was watching Bob's videos. And then another one was Tom Seeley and his Honeybee Democracy book. We'll have him in November via Zoom. And look at us now. We got Bob and Becky. And Becky, by the way, got introduced by Miss Gabrielle there of the UGA extension. So thank you guys for being here. Thank you to our sponsors for the coffee and much more about that. Let's kick it off with Miss Becky, please.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Wow, I'm honored. I'm honored to be here at the first Bee Talks. And I've enjoyed so far meeting everybody and talking bees. Although my subject matter today is monarchs. But that's okay, because I'm going to talk a little about both and how important both of them are and how they are somewhat related. So I will get started. So I'm coming to you today from Blairsville, Georgia. I work at the Georgia Mountain Research and Education Center, which is a 400-acre farm in Blairsville. Not only am you saw my titles, I wear many hats for UGA. I am the Community and School Garden Coordinator for the state. I'm a Pollinator Health Associate. Most people know me better as the coordinator for the Great Southeast Pollinator Census, which is a statewide initiative for pollinator education and data gathering. At GMREC, I'm known as the beekeeper, so I'm the apiarist at GMREC. I run Russian bees there. I loved Italians. Italians are easy. I could sit outside the hive in a t-shirt and tank top and weed them. The Italians are mean. They will ping me as I get out of the Jeep, especially after I've robbed honey from them. But up here, we are mountainous. We are about, that orchard is about 3,000 feet up. We have about 2,000 apple trees that all bloom in April around a 3-week period of time. And we know from research that to make a good quality apple that you will buy at the store, that bloom needs to be visited by a pollinator 8 different times. So if we have 2,000 trees blooming in a relatively short amount of time and we want to make quality apples, 8 visits a blossom, do the math. It's a lot. And my philosophy, my educational background is entomology. My specialty in graduate school was beneficial entomology, especially bees and native bees. I succumbed to the philosophy that to run the farms that we run in America, we need honeybees and native bees. So I work with the orchard manager there to take care of our native bee populations as well as our honeybee population. So I always get a little nervous around April, making sure that how our native bees got through the winter, how are they flying, how are my honeybees doing. I chose Russians lately because the Italians were not getting through the winter and spring. What we have up there is a unique system or a unique ecosystem where we could get them through the winter just fine, but come April, we will inevitably have a week where we're in the 20s. And it depends on how low we are in the 20s and how long we are, how much brood is going to die. And I have gotten every hive through the winter. I have lost numerous hives at that time period. I have kept these Russians for 3 years, about 3 years now, and gotten them through everything. The trade-off is these are not bees I would get beginners to use. And I keep bees near the main building so that if we have guests, the dean or somebody who's interested, I can suit them up and get them in. I cannot do that with the Russians because somebody new going in the hive is already nervous. I lift the top off and those bees are already angry with me. So there's a trade-off there. I also do a lot of work with the Honeybee Lab out of Athens, which is doing remarkable work. The research that is coming down the pike that is of interest to all beekeepers are some non-chemical ways to manage varroa mites, especially queen breeding for hygienics. And that's one of the reasons that Russians have become a little popular is because they build up slower in the spring. So if you are really into honey production, you're going to not get the yield you would. But if your Italians don't make it through the winter, but their queens are more hygienic and my mite counts are extremely low compared to my Italians. So that's just a little bit about apiarying and beekeeping up in the mountains and some of the work I get to do there. As I mentioned, I am the coordinator of the Great Pollinator Census, and that's an old logo. Does anybody participate? All right, yay. Hopefully that you guys will all jump on board. It is a community science project that started in 2019 statewide. It is now Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Florida, and Alabama will be joining in 2025. I left some cards back there. If you guys have habitat for bees, then you have habitat to count pollinators for the census. But today, I'm not talking anymore about that. We are going to be talking about butterflies, especially monarchs. So I'm gonna date myself a little bit. I grew up on a farm, and this was pre-internet days, out in Powder Springs, Georgia. We had 10 acres. I raised chickens, the whole 9 yards. And my dad got us the National Geographic. Does anybody remember those days? Yeah. I knew when it came in the mailbox. And as a little kid, I was so excited because I always loved science, and there was only 3 channels if the weather was good. It's not like I'm getting PBS, right? And so I remember when this came out. And this specific National Geographic talked about how the people in the North American area knew that monarch butterflies went somewhere, but they didn't know where. And the people down in Mexico knew that the monarchs went somewhere, but they didn't know where. In 1974, and there's a documentary that's on PBS that's wonderful to watch, they made that connection. And I remember that very well, and I thought, oh my God, can you imagine being able to see that? Well, I got to see it. I'm getting chills talking about it. I got to see it. And I got to see it on a science type permit, which meant that we got to do a little bit more than the people who just pay a lot of money and get to go down or live there. And it was really interesting because I tried for years to get on a permit, and I'd get on one and it would fall through or something would happen. But my husband Millard is in the back with me today. My husband and I were on our way to Savannah for a conference, and I got a call from somebody and said, I got a permit. Do you want to go? And I'm like, here's my credit card number, you know. And at one point, you know, my husband has a job. He is a North American safety and health manager. So at one point, he did say to me, the areas of Mexico that you're going to are not the most American friendly. Is there anything I can do to talk you out of it? But once I said no, he was on board 100%. So what happened, and what we know about monarchs, let's talk a little bit about that first, is we think about, and I'm gonna kind of take some perceptions of monarchs and put them on their head for you. We know that this is what happens. The monarchs are going to Mexico. They're going to a very small, limited area of Mexico to overwinter. And we should know that this is very important for us. All right? The monarchs have started. They're coming. So my question to you as we go through this presentation is, are you ready? All right? We talk about building milkweed. We talk about planting milkweed. How many of you have seen monarchs laying eggs on milkweed in your garden? Nobody. Very few people. I will have maybe 2 or 3 a year because the monarchs are not coming here when they move north. All right? They're coming around Georgia to go up north. If you have some monarchs at your place and laying eggs, then yahoo, and that's great. But I can tell you that when we used to live in Cherokee County, I had 4 different types of milkweed. I had milkweed everywhere. I got 0 monarchs. Up where we live now in the mountains, I've had 3 or 4, and I get so excited when I see those caterpillars, but that's really not the ecosystem we live in. We live in the ecosystem that is majorly important over the next several months as these monarchs head to Mexico. All right, so that we know and kind of keep that in mind. I have friends who live all over that are interested in this migration, and this is on the Blue Ridge Parkway up in North Carolina, and they actually will go to areas of Blue Ridge Parkway and count the monarchs as they go by. And last year, a friend sent me this picture. The monarchs are flying about 10,000 feet up. All right, and as they fly to Mexico, they are a unique type of butterfly. They're not the typical monarch that you see in your yard, if you get to see any. And they need nutrition and they need places to roost. So luckily where we are, I can face my house and look up, and they will come out of migration into our meadow to feed and roost before they head back on to Mexico. And that's what they're counting. They're counting to see how many there are coming out of migration to get some nutrition before they make that journey. So they made the journey and I made the journey. So I got on a plane in Atlanta actually and started out in Mexico City. I really, a year, I trained for this. So I knew we were going to be hiking at about 11,000 feet elevation, and I knew we were hiking around 7 miles a day. My husband and I are big hikers out west. I know about altitude sickness, so I know you can train, and so I trained for that trip. I also attempted to learn Spanish. I am not a very gifted language person. My daughter in Duolingo was my friend, and I thought, you know, I'd give it a shot, right? The area we went to, no one spoke English, all right? And so I knew that going in, so I wanted to make the most of this trip. I learned some Spanish, and I figured something out. I'm not getting graded on this. So if I say, yo necesito agua fria, then I'm not getting a grammar mark. I'm just communicating, and that made a big difference. So when we got down there, there were, I think, 9 of us on the permit. We were required to have a guide who spoke English and Spanish, and we had a driver who spoke only Spanish, and he loved me because I tried. And he would sit with me at dinner and just laugh and laugh at my Southern girl attempts. So it was already an adventure. I'm already thinking this is going to be great. I'm looking out of the plane, and I'm looking at this. This is the forest. So the mountains looked a little familiar. The trees looked a little different. But this was the goal. This is from the plane, and this is where the monarchs are headed down to Mexico. So what we know about these monarchs are they are a special generation. In Mexico, they call them the Methuselah generation. We usually call them the super generation. They are genetically, biologically different than their parents, than their mother. They are born to be bigger. They're born to have more white on their wings. That helps, they think that has to do with the solar heating of the butterfly as they fly. They are also, will live longer, and they are born without the urge to mate. So that means that all of these monarchs that are flying south are not, they don't care about milkweed, they're not laying eggs, they haven't mated yet. All right, so that's something important to know. I made some notes here. They have stored extra energy in the form of lipids when they become caterpillars. So biologically, they are totally different than the other butterflies. Now, we have people who, we have a great researcher named Andy Davis at the University of Georgia, and he's at the School of Ecology, and he studies only monarchs. And he talks about how if you raise monarchs from hand, they are not the same. Chances of them making it to Mexico are slim to none. So that is something that is new, that information is new, and some people have a hard time with that. I have I've hand raised some painted ladies for educational purposes when I do youth work. I've never done that with monarchs. But these monarchs are special, all right? The ones we see, and they're bigger. You're definitely going to see that. This is from Andy on some recent work he did, talking about the solar energy. They receive a ton of solar energy, and that's why instead of flying, they're soaring at the top. Their wings are wide open, their wings are bigger, and these white dots are also bigger to help them absorb solar energy for their flight. So, wow, this is a lot more complicated, than we originally thought, right? But extremely interesting. So we do know that the captive reared monarchs are weaker, they're paler, and they they get confused on where to go. So helping the native monarchs is our way to go to be helpful. All right, so we see things all over, milkweed for monarchs. And if you've had that happen, we have little tiny eggs. She lays them separate places. The caterpillars emerge and they consume milkweed. And that milkweed has some cardioglyphosates in it that will make them distasteful to predators, which is helpful. But just like every other plant, and if you're a plant person, this is interesting, some milkweeds contain more of it than others. So some of those caterpillars will have more of it than others. And other insects like fireflies also can consume milkweed. So don't give up on your milkweed. The fireflies love it too for that same reason. So I give you that background, and we've flown to Mexico. When I got there, I was a little surprised about how all of Mexico embraces these insects. It is now part of their national identity. And this was in Mexico City. I saw murals everywhere with beautiful butterflies and a lot of artwork, a lot of talks, a lot of emphasis, even from the office of the president of Mexico, on this issue. When we got to Angangeo, there was also a lot of wonderful artwork. And I was really excited because when we got here, I told our guide, I can translate this. Let me do our translation. So Sisters of the Sun. And there's a lot of mythology, a lot of thought about these monarchs. And they arrive in Angangeo around Halloween, around the Mexican Day of the Dead, which is November 1st. And we saw a lot of graveyards where the people had decorated their ancestors' graves. So a lot of thought process is that they are their ancestors coming to greet them. I met a local woman and actually had a meal with her, and she was about my age. She said when she was a little girl, she was terrified of the butterflies because migration was so thick it would block out the sun for days. Can you imagine? Enough butterflies to block out the sun for days. That doesn't happen anymore. But when she was little, she was scared of the butterflies because she knew it would be dark, for a couple days, which kind of goes with the whole Day of the Dead type of thing, right? Again, I saw more artwork. This is 100 peso, actually. That's what their pesos look like, and they honor the butterfly. And if you had a camera, you could take a picture and the butterflies would actually fly. That's what they do with their money. So all that being said, the monarchs are part of their national identity at this point. One of the things we got to do was we got to visit a school in Ngongeo. And being the privileged, knowing all, arrogant Americans, we go in with books for these kids and the attitude of, what are you doing for these monarchs? All right? So these are the kids. They were so excited to see Americans. And we had a translator and we could exchange questions. And their questions were, how much time do our kids study? Do they play soccer? What do they eat for dinner? And this school, the parents make the lunches for the children every day, and we were invited to take a meal with them. So a little bit more about them later, but they actually grow up with the butterflies all the time. So just like we grow up with all the pollen, right? And we think that pollen is a nightmare. People come from Japan to see the pollen. It is a natural phenomenon. So they grow up with the butterflies, and so, we're freaking out about them, and they're like, this is how we live our lives. In Mexico City, we saw these ancient pyramids. Mel, what's the name of them? My pronunciation is not good. And that was cool. We got to see them. I was like, okay, well, that's really cool. And then I saw this. So these pyramids are tens of thousands of years old. And this is a butterfly. This is on a crown, and it is also on battle armor that these peoples used. Now, I don't know why that wasn't brought out to us, but I'm like, oh my gosh. So this is Mexico City. This isn't Ngongeo. We're hundreds of miles apart here, but it must have been enough influence with the monarchs to make that a symbol in this ancient people's way of life. All right, I thought that was very cool. And then I got to see some other cool things. So we get to Ngongeo, we hike 7 miles into this forest, and unfortunately for us, unfortunately for the butterflies, it was an unusually warm spring. So they were flying about a month earlier than they normally do. They all roost on this oil mill forest, which is different than our forest. One of the things that caught my eye is they have the evergreens here, but among the evergreens, they also have a lot of blooming plants. And the reason is or how this works for the butterflies, is when those butterflies come out of diapause, so when they get to Mexico, they're at this fir forest, and they hang there. And they don't go into hibernation. Their metabolism slows, and it is the perfect temperature, which is chilly, and it's the perfect humidity, which is low, to allow them to live through the winter. If it is too hot, they can't stay there. If it's too cold, the butterflies die. If it's too humid, they get wet and they rot. So it is the perfect ecosystem for this. When they come out of diapause and they're getting ready to move back through the United States, that hormone kicks in that wants them to mate, so they usually mate in Mexico, and they're hungry. So this forest has all of these blooming plants around waist level. And if you think of our forest, we will have beautiful flowers, usually on the edge of the forest. If we start hiking deep in the forest, we're not going to see too many blooming things. There's a lot of blooming things here. At the El Rosario Monarch Butterfly Reserve, it is now designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it was designated that in 2008. In 2020, there was an issue there. They have managers there that are local people, and their job is to prevent people from cutting this forest down. The 2 managers were murdered, and their bodies were displayed as a warning to stay out of our business. If we need the forest for firewood or whatever, we're taking the forest. So there's a lot of groups that have moved in there that are nonprofits teaching the local people how to stay warm in their homes without cutting the forest, how to do those type of things. But there's definitely some tension. And this story I did not tell till I returned home to not cause any anxious time, but we're on a bus with our driver, and twice we were stopped by locals who wanted money. So the first time it happened, the driver told our translator, and he looked around and he said, Nobody say nobody say a word. Nobody move. Nobody look these people in the eye. And they're big men who put a blockade in the road and came around. And twice we gave money to go. I was thinking it was a great adventure. Of course, Americans were kidnapped after we got back, but I wasn't thinking that was going to happen. But I did not tell my husband through text that this had happened until we got home. So there is some animosity there as well. Yeah, so we see some beautiful, I got a lot of really neat pictures. If you don't know, this is a little entomological fact that will amaze your friends. This is a male and a female. You can tell the difference because the male has these little dots on his wings, and they are receptors for female hormones so that he can find a mate. And her veins are her veins. They're not really veins, but her markings are thicker because she's giving off that pheromone. So that's a female and that's a male. And we saw a lot of them looking for mates when we were down there because, again, it was warm and they were coming out and they were wanting to mate and eat. And, yeah, so we saw a lot of that. All right, so this is what we expect. And this isn't a good picture, and I've got better ones. This is what we expected to see. We had these big bundles of butterflies hanging on these branches. So they hang together and they rotate who's on the outside to regulate the temperature there. Right? And, but we were seeing them fly. So keep in mind, these are bigger than what we're seeing. And there are 9 of us, and we went behind the rope. So we got to do some science things that the general public doesn't get to do. And so, I mean, we were all in awe. So these are the things that we were seeing up close and personal. It was pretty amazing. And imagine being a person who in 1976 saw that National Geographic. I went behind a corner, so I saw no other humans. And I just stood there, and they're on my hair, they're flying between my legs. There's so many, I can hear their wings. All right? It was a pretty amazing sight. Our guide gave me the hint to take my cell phone and turn it on slow-mo and just do this. So, but you can see how big those butterflies, I mean, they're not, they're big compared to this, but there's a sizable difference. And if you've looked at butterflies a long time, that's one of the things that's striking to you, is how big those butterflies actually are. And they are everywhere, millions and millions of them. Yeah. So every single one of us cried, I'll be honest with you. We're a bunch of entomologists who have been geeking out about these our whole lives. And at one time you're in awe, and the other time you're like, oh my God, we got to do something, right? But I have this on my desktop, and if I'm having a day, I will say, okay, I got to keep going. We got to keep doing what we're doing. Yeah, so it was unusually warm, and they're already flying and 3 weeks early making their trip up, which can be problematic because they lay a lot of their eggs on milkweed on meadows in Texas. And if it's not warmed up in Texas, or they've had a flood or whatever, there is no milkweed there. So it is a very delicate situation. Okay, so one thing I wanted to mention, we talked about the school we went to. And I did indicate that, boy, I felt foolish coming in there as the arrogant American in a foreign country, to asking these students and these teachers and these parents, what do you do? What are you doing for these butterflies? Because we're not seeing them, we're not seeing as much. So why are you allowing the forest to be cut down? Are you spraying pesticides? What are you doing? What are you doing to prevent this from happening? And then I met this girl. She's in the 6th grade. She didn't speak any English. She was quiet most of the time. When we were finished handing out our books and having our discussions, she raised her hand and she stood up and was called upon and said, what I want to know is what you're doing. Because we are seeing less butterflies every year. And keep in mind, they don't see the caterpillars. They don't see the chrysalis. They only see the adult butterflies. And so, wow, that was a moment for all of us because we went in as the all-knowing people and we got schooled. So that on the plane ride home, I was thinking, I got to step it up. We got to step it up. We got to figure out what's going on. So how do we do that? How do we step it up? Well, this is what we all, like we mentioned, are trained to want. And we feel that we have failed if we don't get this monarch butterfly caterpillar eating beautiful monarch milkweed. And we also, if we get to see a chrysalis, we're considered lucky. They don't ever put their chrysalis near the milkweed. They crawl somewhere else. This was actually at our home. But as we talked about before, this is what we have going on. So how can we, knowing that the monarchs are coming, how can we be ready? All right? We can be ready by planting habitat. All right, and we can be logical about it. This is a non-native plant, by the way. This is a Tithonia, but it is one of my favorite plants on the planet. It is seeded. You can't fail with it. And what the monarchs are looking for, they're 10,000 feet up. They need to come down and get nutrition, and they need a place to roost. When they're looking for nutrition, there's two ways they find it. One is a chemical way where they can sense sort of like a smell, and then they come out and then they use visual cues. All right, so if you have one sunflower and you're praying that the monarch will find it, chances are pretty slim, right? And if you teach, or if you've taken landscape architecture classes, they tell you want 3 to 5 of something. For monarchs, you want 7 to 9 of something. If we had unlimited space, my advice would be you plant plants that are tall and that they're visually accessible, not hidden down among the grass, and you want a large amount of them, and you want several different species so that they're able to find them. I mentioned to several of you that at our home, we don't have a lawn. We have restored a prairie, and we grow a lot of boneset and goldenrod and asters for this time of the year, and we can watch them come down, and it's thrilling. All right, so this is one plant that is a non-native, but it is spectacular for our monarchs. This is not a monarch. This is Joe Pye weed, considered a weedy plant on the side of the road. Wow, the nutrition that plant has. As you can tell, I get a lot of different butterflies on it. Another plant that I often see them on is ironweed. Again, we're talking 6 feet tall, beautiful purple bloom, native, roadside weed. One of the things that I do is when we live about 3 miles up a mountain, and if I see the mowers at the bottom, I know that means they're going to be mowing the sides of the road, at least the paved part, and that is my permission to take my shovel. And anything this far off the road, I'm taking home, and I've done that multiple times. But we have ironweed blooming. This is a picture of our prairie. That's the boneset blooming. It's just now being fragrant. And so that means we said last night, all right, monarchs, I don't know what else you want, but when you're coming, we're ready for you. So messy is fine. This is a garden that I helped develop in a community garden, specifically for monarchs. It looks wild, doesn't it? I like that wild look, and the monarchs like it as well. What is that? Well, we've got bee balm up here. Right here. We have some rattlesnake master here, which puts out a lot of nectar for the butterflies. I see some ironweed in the back, some helianthus right here, and some ironweed in the back there. All of those are native plants. If you're interested in monarchs and you want to learn a little bit more about them, Monarchs Across Georgia is a great organization. They do a lot of work on habitat restoration, education as well. And if you are interested in the great, that's the wrong logo, Southeast Pollinator Census, again, I have a pamphlet back there that you're welcome to take with you. And my last thing I wanted to share with you is we have been very excited that a author, Susan Richmond, who is a nationally known children's author, has tagged along with me for a couple years and interviewed me, and we have a book about the census coming out in April. It is a children's book. It is spectacular. She's coming down and we're doing a book tour. But if you work with kids or you work in the schools, this would be a great addition. As you can see, we have a monarch on on the cover. My only stipulation is that I wanted a girl as the main character, and they gave her curly hair, so I was appreciative of that. Her name is Millie for mellifluous, right? And her teacher's name is Miss Bombus, which is for Bumblebee. So look for that coming out in April. And Miller tells me that's my time, so any questions? Yes, sir.
I was prepared for you to tell us that it was all about chemicals and poisons, but in a nutshell, you're saying it's a lack of force.
Yes. I think when, in my work in this field, which has been many years, and actually my whole life has been about this type of thing, it's easy to blame chemicals for a lot of things because that's something that we can say they're doing. They're putting chemicals. The farmers are poisoning this, when in actuality, having worked on several farms in our state, I can only vow for what goes on in Georgia, the farmers don't use that many chemicals, and they're actually very judicious with them. They have access to chemicals that are a little more specialized, whereas the average homeowner can go down to Pikes and get 7 spray, which kills everything. I can smell it when I get out of the truck at a visit. So I'm not going to tell you that chemicals don't have something to do with it, but the lack of habitat, and we're making more people, we're not making more land. Every time a new subdivision goes up, every time a new strip mall goes up, all of that forage is being taken away. And as homeowners, we can do something about that by adding forage to our homes and using plants that have ecological value. My mother never really understood what I did, and when she moved in her house in Athens, I did a whole planting of all native wonderful things. She met a man, and he tore it all up, and he put knockout roses, which have absolutely no ecological value at all. So picking our plants judiciously, looking at natives, looking at things that we know have good nectar and good content for pollen and that don't need a lot of chemicals to survive. That's kind of my angle about this. Go ahead.
Don't want to eat it.
No, you're fine.
So lack of forage en route. Is there a lack of forage at their destination too up north?
That I know it's the same problem everywhere. And it's that, how are we housing people? If we're housing people that we're taking down in Minnesota or Michigan, the population of the United States is growing, and those people have to live somewhere, and that means that probably forage is being taken away. I'm very familiar with what's going on in Georgia, not so much as what's going on there. So I'm guessing it's pretty similar.
In the old days, it would have been mostly forest stuff there, and now it's...
Well, we some would be forest, but some would be native grasslands. We had, especially on the way between here and there were native grasslands. Dwayne Estes does a really good job about talking about the native grasslands that were lost, that the native peoples actually would burn. That was our model to do our prairie. So we did have native grasslands for millennial years. And then there were forests, but there was enough habitat that we had enough monarchs going south to block the sun. And now those are subdivisions and strip malls and housing for all of us because we keep making more people and not more land. So, yes.
So one of the things that really kind of hurt me was when I saw the spraying in New York of the mosquitoes,
Mm-hmm.
the West Nile virus,
Mm-hmm.
and they just spray
Yeah.
All over the place.
Right.
And I'm like, and now they're saying Georgia has, the West Nile virus. I'm like,
Okay.
how can we keep that from happening?
Well, education is one thing. What we know, what I have seen, and Gabrielle's probably on the same page as me. Jump in if you're not. I lived in Cherokee County for many years, and when the West Nile virus first came out, whenever that was, years and years ago, we had a company that went to all the schools in the middle of the day and sprayed. All right, that killed all the bees that were out there, and mosquitoes aren't out there at the time of the day. But we know mosquitoes live in English ivy, which is not a native plant. We know that they have to have still water to lay eggs. So once you eliminate those things and create an ecosystem, we do not have a mosquito problem where we live. We have an ecosystem. So we have some mosquitoes, but we also have bats, and we don't have standing water. We have no English ivy on our property. So educating people about that, and then confronting the companies that are doing this. If you feel like you're in danger and need to spray, then why are you spraying in the middle of the day when the mosquitoes aren't even out and you're using a contact spray, which means you have to touch the insect to kill it, right? So what we are seeing is, in Georgia anyway, is a more common sense approach and less of this, because people are saying, you just can't do this anymore. You can't spray the roadsides, just because you think. Or up where we live, they were starting to spray the roadsides with herbicides, and then there was a big outrage, and now they mow. So just being involved, and pushing, but yeah, it's heartbreaking. One of the problems we have, and please knock me off, because one of the problems we have is we live in the mountains, and a lot of people have cabins up there, right? And carpenter bees are an issue, and they are. I worked at a dairy for 7 years, and we had an old tractor shed that was over 50 years old, and part of it fell because for 50 years, thousands of carpenter bees were making holes. So you have to find a way to live with that and not destroy your home. Well, people were having, these companies would come and say, we're going to spray your home for carpenter bees. And it's a contact spray. So they would show up and they would spray the house, and everything that was around the house died immediately and fell on the deck. One of my friends had her family cabin done that, and she went and picked up all the insects that were killed. 2 carpenter bees were killed. The rest were non-carpenter bee, so there's a lot of, misinformation out there. Yes, ma'am.
So when they fly from, how many times do they have to, come down to feed themselves?
It depends on the weather. Are the jet stream up there, are they pushing them along? Is it been real rainy? How much nutrition are they able to get at one time? So a lot of it is just dependent on how strong they are to start and what the weather is on the way down.
And how long does the journey take?
3 weeks, depending on the situation, where they've started and what they've found as they head down. Yes, ma'am.
How long do they live?
This generation will live from the time they leave. Let's say we have 3 weeks, and then they spend the entire winter there. So we're looking at months and months, where the average monarch will live 5 weeks. So it is a huge biological difference. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
If a gardener were to set aside a habitat space in
Mhm.
the garden to try to plant the native plants, what is the minimum square footage that you would expect to be needed for it to be effective?
For monarchs,
For monarchs, but also like it
for bees or whatever.
kind of what's the minimum goal? Like if I'm talking to the average homeowner,
Okay.
So what would of course anything is better than nothing.
Right, and that's usually my thing.
Right.
I work in Atlanta, and I know Gabrielle does too, high rises, and we put habitat on those. It is the best you can do, right? We no longer have a lawn. I will never mow grass in my life. Every inch is going to be some ecological value or some way to grow some food, right? Not everybody's willing to do that. So I think, if your neighbors and everyone in your area is doing a small patch, that's something. And we're not only, and this is another talk, but we're not only gardening for monarchs when we do this. I'm a bee person. Bumblebees are my specialty, and a bumblebee needs nesting and all that, but you can have a whole sanctuary for bumblebees in a typical subdivision backyard. So by doing this, like we have this prairie, and one of the neat things that we have discovered is all the things we hadn't planned. We grew it for insects. We have baby skunks. We have a fox that Millard saw outside the window yesterday. We have baby deer, which are another story. But we have, so all of these things, and I don't have to spend money on chemicals. We don't use any chemicals. And these native plants just go wild, and they're beautiful. I would say start small and see if you like it, and then you will love it. And then you will say, geez, I don't have to spend every Saturday mowing the grass. I can watch Georgia win. Or I don't have to I don't have to worry about powdery mildew anymore or whatever, and then you'll add more and more. Inevitably, when I visited with a homeowner and we start a small patch, years later, that's what it all is. And even I've been doing work with golf courses, and they're out of play areas. If you've stopped at any of the welcome centers in Georgia that has a pollinator area, I worked on that project. So just being creative and trying to think outside the box and not have everything look like you live at the Biltmore, I think is a good. And last thing, I promise, I'm sorry because I'm passionate about this. So if you have trouble with your neighbors, signage is a huge deal. If somebody walks by a messy area, they're like, oh, this is awful, this doesn't meet code or whatever. If you maybe mow a strip to make it kind of contained and put a sign, this is for the bees, or I'm increasing pollinator habitat, or look for monarchs, then all of a sudden that weedy area becomes something they want to walk by every night to see what's there. All right, I will stop now.
I think they can speak for everybody else, but Becky, you could have gone on all day long.
Oh, and I could.
And speaking of which, I've got a special local guest here, our mayor.
Oh, wow.
So this way we can immediately talk about the fields, what we're going to be doing around here, right?
Well, hello, Mayor.
Hey, nice
to meet you. Thanks for coming today.
Absolutely. I'll keep it short and sweet. I know you didn't want to hear from an elected official. Y'all didn't come here for politics. But it's funny, the bees are a little close to my heart a little bit. I actually have some hives on my property. Stan keeps them. If you come down Birmingham Highway, right there at the roundabout where the vet clinic is, you'll see some hives up at the top. So that's where I live. Stan gives us some free honey, which is nice. But I really just want to keep it short and sweet. I just want to thank Bart for everything that he's done. We didn't have a Milton Bee Club here, a year or two ago. Also, big shout out to Theo's and Boarding Pass Coffee. That made my kids, he's eating all the sweets there. It's been a busy Saturday. I got football in the morning. I got touch a truck, and then I got my daughter's cheerleading game. But I just want to say thank y'all for being here. Thank y'all for being Milton citizens. We live in a wonderful community. And the reason why we live in a wonderful community is because of people like Bart and everybody else that volunteers and gives back. And that's what it's all about. So if y'all need anything from me, I'm an open book. I'm always available. My cell phone's on the city website. Be glad to talk to y'all if y'all have any concerns or questions. I'm here for you. And it was very informative.
Well, thank you.
It was very informative.
Thank you
so
very
if
much.
y'all need anything right off the bat, shoot.
Can we make sure there's no spraying in Milton?
No spraying in Milton.
I'm going to contact you about that.
It's interesting. I get a lot of complaints a lot of the time. The first complaint I did receive on some spraying was apparently, and we're still trying to research what we're putting down on the dirt and gravel roads. That might cause some allergic reactions to some pets and stuff. But we typically are pretty good about that. As you know, we have hundreds of acres of passive green space. And I don't think we really spray. I think we let that just grow, really. And we're doing a really good job of that. Now, one of my goals, speaking of which, is to try to get these green spaces open for the public to kind of use. That's a big, big priority because we almost have 1,000 acres. So we've done a good job over the years.
Maybe we can start a community garden.
So we actually have a joint partnership with Alfreda off of Rucker Road. If y'all seen that Rucker Road. So I could see that expanding because I had no idea how large and expansive that is. And I could see that expanding with maybe putting it at Birmingham Park or some other areas. I mean, we have plenty of places for that. So, yeah. All good? Cool. Thanks, y'all. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you for have a good day. Yeah, thank you.